everyone. Welcome to the Teach Middle East podcast. My name is Elisa Grace, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Helen Olds, and she is the principal of the British School Riyadh. And we're talking about life after COVID lockdowns, life in school after being so long on distance learning in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Because many of us believe, because we might be in the UAE or, closer to the UAE like Oman, that schools have just all gone back since last year and everything is back to normal. But that's not the case in every country across the Middle East. So today we're talking to Helen about what it's like in Saudi Arabia. What are the students experiencing coming back? And what are the staff experiencing coming back? She's had a really interesting couple of years. We're going to dive into that a little later on in the podcast. But I think this is one for us to listen to just gather the experiences of school leaders from across the region.
You are listening to the Teach Middle East podcast, connecting, developing, and empowering educators.
Helen, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited to speak to everybody through this podcast and to be invited to be part of this. So yes, I'm principal here at the British International School Riyadh. We are 5 campuses. 3 are based in Riyadh, and we also have a campus in Tabuk and a campus in Taif, both of which are a flight away. And our primary schools, the Tabuk, Taif, Salwa are primary schools, and our Diplomatic Quarter and Al Hamra campuses are both primary and senior schools. And our primary schools range in size from about 30 children through to several hundred children, about 750, 800 children. So it's quite a diverse community, and we've had a really interesting time over the last 3 years. So I've been in Saudi Arabia now for 3 years, and I got partway through my first year and we went into lockdown. And 3 weeks before we'd gone into lockdown, we had signed a contract with the Royal Commission to establish a new campus in the Diplomatic Quarter section of Riyadh. And so during that process, we were then contractually obliged to complete the renovation of this brand new campus ready for opening in September 2020. But in the end, we opened it as a remote school initially, even though we were all ready and set for children to go. So it really has been quite a journey. And I'm in my 3rd year now. And what I'm finding is, as we have now reopened, then with running events, and it feels like my first year because people say, oh, you're having your year 11 prom. And I have to say, well, we've not had one before because we were locked down. So it feels like I'm completing both my 3rd year and my first year simultaneously.
Wow. When did you go back to face-to-face learning in Saudi Arabia?
So it was different from our primary and senior schools. So our senior school, once the children were double vaccinated, 12 and over, they were able to come back in from September. But because the announcement of that happened quite late and there had to be a time lag between having the first and second vaccination, it really took us till October to get all of the seniors back in the building. And there were lots of restrictions about mask wearing, social distancing, etc. For our primary schools, it was different, and they didn't come back in until the 16th of January this year, 2022. So they were online for a lot longer. And it was very difficult because it was such a different way of working. We know that children of the youngest ages learn better in a play-based environment, and that doesn't naturally suit remote learning and an online teaching.
Yeah, that's amazing. One of the things that made me want to talk to you was to really dive into what it was like to have those younger children on distance learning for such an extended period and what the challenges were. But before we get into those, how did schools handle the long lockdown that COVID caused in the kingdom?
Well, we could see it coming, although we didn't know how long it was going to be. So one of the things that we had done as a community was prepared ourselves. So we had readied ourselves with going to the Google platform, to make sure that we could transfer to remote learning if we needed to. At the time, we didn't think it was going to be more than sort of for a few weeks, but we were following closely what was happening in Asia, and we could see that was going to happen. It's very interesting here in Saudi Arabia because everything happens by social media. So people believe sometimes that principals and school leaders get a phone call or an email or a WhatsApp or a heads up that something's going to happen, but we really don't. So we find out at the same time as other people. So I'd actually gone to bed one night and my phone started beeping and going mad. So I thought I probably need to look at that. And I opened up my phone and there was a social media post that schools were closed with immediate effect. And so it was a case of getting up, finding out what that might mean and communicating with the family. So we always felt that we were a little bit behind the curveball with the news. So we had set work for one day, which was asynchronous work online for the children to access. Well, we came into school and regrouped as a faculty as to how we were going to manage things moving forward. And within 24 hours, we had then gone to full live teaching online. But that day that we had in school, we then get notification at 3:00 that teachers and faculty are no longer allowed in the building. So we were sending people home. The music department were kind of wandering home with keyboards and drums under their arm and all the things that they might need to be able to deliver a remote learning, because we didn't know how long it was going to be for and when we were going to be able to get back into the building again. So it was quite a difficult period, and we sort of found that it was a wave. So you might get an announcement and you spend 48 hours just kind of calming everybody down and working out what that might mean for you as a school and community. And then there'll be another announcement. And there was a lot of unexpected news. And in some ways, schools became the face of frustration about decisions that were made, even though we knew it wasn't our fault that there was COVID, and it wasn't our fault that schools were closed. I suppose the frustrations came to us and we became the face of those decisions. And that was hard. Very early on, flights in and out of the kingdom were pulled back and cancelled, and it started to become very few flights in and out to minimise the spread of COVID. And so we had to make decisions like, do we let our staff go back to their home countries? Some people were very keen to be able to do that. And so we did allow that to happen as long as people were able to continue delivering their curriculum online. And if they wanted to do that and they knew that the time zones meant they were getting up at 4:00 in the morning, and they did that. But it was very difficult because we didn't know when flights were going to start and whether flights were going to resume before we needed people face to face in the classroom. And it was a bit of a battle in the end to get people back, because the flights did start again, but they were slow to start. And we had to get special permissions to get people in. So we were simultaneously trying to return existing staff members and recruit new staff in, because we were setting up a whole new school and we needed people back in Kingdom ready to be able to start. And it was that, how long's a piece of string? When are we actually going to reopen? And we didn't want to be in a position where teachers weren't back to be able to deliver the learning that we needed. I think the other frustration that parents had as well was around fees. And I think that was something that will resonate with leaders across the Middle East. You know, there was a bit of pressure about, well, if you're not in school, can you reduce the school fees? And there were some interesting conversations around that, because we needed to be in a position where we could completely restart. And we couldn't let our teachers go because we didn't know when we were going to restart, and we needed to be ready to bring back face-to-face learning. And we had increased overheads because we were developing technology and buying into things that would allow teachers to do responsive teaching, assessment for learning, and all of those things, but to facilitate that happening online rather than in school, as well as having a building to maintain through that as well. So there was some comparison made with, oh, well, I could go to this remote learning school. Absolutely, you could, but they won't be able to open up and bring you back into a building with consistency of teachers at that point either. So it was quite a challenging time, as I'm sure every leader you've spoken to has talked about.
I think what makes it a little bit more interesting in the kingdom is because of the length of time that it took for things to start moving again. You've got to understand, we are based here in the UAE, and things started moving really during the latter part of 2020. Some amount of reopening here and there. I mean, I'm based in Abu Dhabi. It was quite different between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. But all in all, by the time we got to the 2021-2022 academic year, things were pretty much coming back together. What do you think were some of the effects of such an elongated distance learning period on students, whether that be your senior students in secondary or your primary students? You can tackle that as you may. But what do you notice were some of the effects on the students from having to be out of face-to-face for that long?
And there were quite a few effects. One of them was interesting. It was around the physical literacy. Students were typing, weren't using pens and pencils. And so they perhaps lost some of those physical and manual dexterity skills that they might otherwise have developed. They became great at tech. For some of our students, there was a level of perhaps disengagement. As time went by, it always felt like it was a bit of a battle to get children to put their cameras on, either the young children or the older children. And it might be because there was stuff going on in the home environment around them, and that they found that quite challenging. So keeping them engaged. And sometimes some of our families said to us, particularly later on in the piece, that this really isn't working for us with the younger children now. And so we're going to keep them on roll, but we want to just take them out of this situation for a while. And now we're back in school, they have re-engaged. For our examination children, they were kept being more engaged, I think simply because they knew that it was going to be teacher-assessed grades. And so they needed to make sure they kept engaged and produced the things that they needed that allowed us to have the evidence to be able to submit that to the exam boards. But that was very stressful for those students as well, because for a lot of those children, the exam boards made decisions very late in the piece. And so they weren't sure, well, am I going to sit an exam? Is it going to be a teacher assessed? What does that mean for the grades? And there was a lot of chopping and changing. And initially, when the first set of grades came out that first summer, then the exam boards may have adjusted grades down. And then there was a lot of pushback on that because, yes, your history showed that that was the trajectory for, say, a particular subject, but you've got a brand new, brilliant teaching team in place, and those results were not reflective of that current time. So there was a lot of back and forth, and I think that caused quite a lot of anxiety for our students. One of the things that I expected but didn't happen was the social communication. We expected students, and some did become quite isolated, but because in Saudi Arabia, many of our families, not all, but many, live on compounds, and then there was still quite a lot of socialisation happening on those compounds. And so they were mixing with other children. That obviously waxed and waned depending on whether there were a lot of COVID cases on the compound, but they certainly had that interaction. And we've just had our British Schools Overseas and Council of International Schools inspection/accreditation, depending on which one you look at. And that was one of the things that they commented on, how well our children were doing socially, given that they'd been offline for so long. And one of the things that we got our teachers to do was to look at the children and go, right, what is it that they've got a little bit better at during this period? And what is it that we need to do a little bit more of? So we've adjusted the curriculum. So in some things we go, well, we know they're really good with tech now, so we're going to do less of that, but we're going to do more of this. And as I always say to our teachers, teaching's your superpower. And so we will redress that and get them back to where they need to be.
It's amazing to hear that they didn't have that social deficit that we anticipated would happen because of the lockdown. And it's great the fact that they live in compounds, and so that social piece wasn't disrupted terribly because they could still see their friends and they could still talk and interact, obviously, albeit with COVID precautions, etc. Something you said earlier that I wanted to go back to. You talked about the fact that you were opening a new school during the pandemic, which I don't envy you. Like, I don't even know how you did that. But how did the fact that Saudi Arabia had such a longer lockdown than elsewhere, did it impact your recruitment?
That's a really interesting question, actually. And it's difficult to tell, if I'm being really honest. And the reason for that is that we didn't sign our contract to open the new or even develop the new campus until February. And we were then opening that campus in September. So normally our recruitment, our teachers, we go through an intentions exercise in October, and then we start recruiting from then on. So we were already really late in the piece for recruitment. So one of the things that we did, we engaged a couple of recruiting agencies to support us with that. And I think because of the uncertainty around COVID, that actually worked in our favour. Riyadh is a growing market for schooling, and so we actually maintained our student numbers during that period, whereas I know in some other GCSE countries and other schools in GCSE countries, the enrolment dropped.
Yeah.
And when enrolment dropped, there were some redundancies. So we were very fortunate in being able to pick up some great teachers through that redundancy process. And in fact, a couple of teachers who'd come back to us having had a period away. So in a way, that worked in our favour. I think the challenge for our new teachers, especially where we had a teaching couple, was one, getting them into the country, but also if they had children, how they were sort of homeschooling their own children and supporting that while trying to work full time at the same time. And if they were in Kingdom, we could help them out a little bit because there was a support network of nannies and helpers that could be used for that. But if their level of English wasn't terribly high, then that put an immense level of pressure on those families. So it was quite challenging. On the compound that I live on, one day they said, right, no external nannies and helpers in because we want to keep COVID out. So I had to go over process of negotiation. Can we find an apartment? Can we get them to live in with us for a while so that we've got the nannies? We call it Nanny Gate, but we've got the nannies and helpers here so that we can keep our teachers teaching. And so the compound were really helpful with that. But it was all the things you never expected to be actually doing during that time. So we were pretty fortunate with recruitment. And actually our retention has remained with those teachers we recruited during that period. The vast majority of them, as we've gone through our intentions exercise this year, and want to stay with us. So that's been really positive as well.
That is brilliant. Like, I really expected another answer. I'm quite pleased that you guys at the British International School Riyadh were able to really get the best of what was happening during that time. Because a lot of schools reported difficulties that people wanted to stay put. You know, uncertainty brings anxiety, right? And so a lot of people were thinking, well, I know where I am, I know the school I'm in or the country I'm in, etc. So I don't want to move. But you seem to have managed to buck that trend, and that is really good on you. So now that the students are back face to face and school is buzzing with a nice noise, you know, we as teachers, we like that noise. It's that nice noise you hear down the corridors. What are you changing in light of the fact that they were out for such a long time and now have to come back in? What have you done differently?
So it really is all around the well-being piece, and there's sort of several things in that. So we were fortunate in that we were able to negotiate where we could bring small groups of students in for interventions for up to 1 day a week. So we definitely milked that for all that it was worth. And so most students were able to come in for up to 1 day a week. So that allowed us to start getting those routines established, building up to the full reopening. So that was really helpful for us. And although we weren't allowed to bring students into school, we were able to take them out to our desert camp. So there were things that we could do around team building, resilience, developing those skills, and to bringing the community together. One of the things we also do as a school is what we term our autobiographical approach. And we model that from the top down. So when we started it, I modeled a form of biography to the staff. They then model that to the students. The students create their own biographies and share them with each other so that we celebrate our differences and leverage from the things that we have in common to work together. And I think that relationship piece is crucial. Making sure that children know each other, understand each other, recognize that we're different, but we have much in common, and that the teachers connect with those children is absolutely vital. And it was much harder to do online than it was when we have them in person. And I remember chatting to one of our early years senior leadership members, and she had taken on a class during this period. And she said to me, I thought that these children could do all this online, and we were going through all, it might have been phonics, and that they really nailed it. And then I got them into the building and realized that they couldn't actually do it. And you'd got some children where perhaps mum and dad were sat with them at home, helping them. And so they were doing better than they actually could when they had to work independently. And then you had other children who perhaps both parents were working and they had a helper at home and they had to work much more independently. There may not have been the support with the English language skills to be able to help those children deconstruct those tasks. And so they had to become very, very independent. So you almost had the sort of two extremes going there. So it has been a case of getting children back into the building, and our teachers have had to become much more skilled at differentiating their lessons really carefully, and a much broader range of interventions and ways that you might plan your lesson to ensure that you're bringing all of those children on. Yes, you're challenging those that really need that extra challenge, but those that have perhaps struggled during this period, you've been able to support them. And one of the things that we found during the period was that different things work for different families. So when you might bring them all into school and work in a certain way, some families wanted asynchronous learning where they could just access it any time when they could help their children. Other families wanted live lessons. And so it was really hard to get that balance right. And I think that's reflected on the differences we see in the children when we come back into the building. So we worked a lot with our staff around how we can make sure that we are doing this responsive teaching all the time, looking at where they're at and helping them to move on from where they are, so that any areas where they may have perhaps not been as good as we thought they are, we can sort of bring them back through to where they should be for their age and level.
Yeah, I think it's become such a balancing act for teachers, because you do have the students who have come back and they're more independent because now they've had to take on a lot of the responsibility for their own learning over these years that they would not have normally been responsible for. And then there are students who fall in behind. And I can just imagine what that is like for teachers who have to now start to consider all these different factors, which leads me nicely into talking about staff well-being, because we talked a little bit about how students' well-being is being put as a priority. But what's staff well-being like, having had to really be on this, I don't know, I want to call it a treadmill, but being on this real ride for the last several years? What's the effect? What have you seen as the effect on the staff well-being?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it has been very challenging. And we've done our level best. And I would like to think that our retention is a reflection that, by and large, people think we've got it more right than we've got it wrong, but not necessarily got it right all of the time, because teachers had to completely relearn their craft by teaching online and re-prepare all of their materials, look at the toolkit that they use. And that was immensely hard and draining. And if you were a teaching couple with your own children as well, then the days were immensely long. So we tried to take as much off the table as we could for people to allow them to focus and concentrate on that. So where we might have had meeting times or in-service training days for staff, we would give them over to support the planning. we were also, especially when we were very locked down in the first year, we were able to adjust the holidays because no one could come in or out the country. So we were able, from that March to June, we didn't go more than 4 weeks without a holiday. We did a bit of surveying of the families and adjusted that. So they might do 4 and a bit weeks and have a week off. And that really helped to sort of pace people. A lot of people wanted to go home. There was a lot of anxiety at that time because it was that fear of the unknown. So if people wanted to go to the home country, we let them. We did then get to the point where we needed to bring people back. And we did say one half term, I think it's 2020 in the October, that please don't travel. We were trying to save so that everyone could go away in the December break. Unfortunately, we then got stuck. December 2020, KSA closed flights in and out of the kingdom again because of worries about a new variant. So we then had staff stranded all over the world in all sorts of different time zones. And there was a lot of anxiety at that period. And we had to call people back. And many staff had to do 2 weeks in a third country before they came back because they weren't allowed to fly directly from the UK, which was seen as the hub of this new variant. So it was quite challenging during that time. So we tried to check in with staff, do well-being chats. We tried to survey them. We tried to be as compassionate as possible, but you're always constantly balancing student needs and the demands of our families with the staff needs as well. And I'd like to think that we're a compassionate school and we try and support families because we had staff at this time going through with family members that had COVID and maybe needed to get back to their home country. And normally you'd give them a period of time and they'd go and come back within that period. But then you had to allow additional time for quarantine and getting from A to B and how you'd manage that. So it was extremely difficult. But like I said, I'd like to think that our staff would say we got it more right than we did wrong.
I mean, I love the idea of you changing and working with the holidays so that people didn't get burnt out over long periods. Loved that idea. Because if you're there and you're stuck, what's to stop you from teaching 4 weeks, taking a break, and then carrying on? That was genius. I think many people would not have thought, schools are very much set in stone when it comes to holidays. I've not actually heard of a school manipulating or a district or even a country manipulating the holidays to suit the well-being of the staff. Genius. I like that. Let's talk a little bit about education in the kingdom. I know a lot of your time there has been spent in lockdown because, so they did the long lockdown thing. But here's the question. What are you excited about in terms of education in Saudi Arabia? What are you seeing? What's exciting? Why should I even, consider it and fly over there? Convince me.
No, well, I hope I will. And I think it's something I actually had to get my head around because we were asked whether we wanted to open this additional campus and had this opportunity in the diplomatic quarter. So one of the questions that our Board of Governors asked, well, why would we do this? Where are these children going to come from? And is it a good decision for us as a school? So we actually had to dive into the detail of the education sector here in Saudi Arabia. And I think one of the things that has happened over the last 3 years is a period of immense change. So against the backdrop of COVID, we've had huge change in Saudi Arabia. So women can drive, relaxed rules around sort of prayer times, wearing of the abaya for Western women, etc. Vision 2030 is very much at the forefront of what the country's doing. So during lockdown, the British Embassy were phenomenal at getting British interests in KSA together on a weekly basis so we could share information on how things were going. And that includes schools, businesses. And so I got to know a whole heap of other people, which was a great bonus out of this. And initially there was concern that order books are slowing. money is slow to come in. But Saudi then took advantage of this period and accelerated Vision 2030. And so the giga projects such as the development of NEOM, this futuristic city up in the north, and all things like that started accelerating. And it became really quite a positive news story. And there's a really interesting study. Strategic Gears did this study. It was published in 2018, saying that the number of children requiring private and international education was going to double by 2025. And it's quite the population pyramid of Saudi Arabia is quite youthful. So you've got quite a lot of young children coming through into the system as well. They reckoned in that 7-year period, there'd be another 2.1 children that needed educating. So there was a huge demand and growth for schools. In that period, just over 2.5 years ago, Saudi Arabia opened up for general tourism, not just religious tourism, and opened up the tourist visa process. So it's the country's opening up. They're actively encouraging companies to set up here, and they have arms of their government to do that through the sort of public investment fund. There are various businesses coming in. So it's a real growth sector. So it's quite an exciting time to be in Riyadh and to be in Saudi Arabia because this growth is happening and other schools are coming in, and it adds a level of competition. And actually competition is never a bad thing because it forces you to reevaluate what you're doing, raise your game, and make sure that you can be the best that you can be.
Amazing. And in terms of the teacher community in Saudi, because we have a really great teacher community here in the UAE, we do events in the UAE, and we do have teachers that come over to the Teach Middle East events from Saudi, from Qatar, from Bahrain, and from Kuwait. But they also, in their individual countries, have networks that are growing. What is the network like in Saudi Arabia? Are teachers really on the cusp of innovation? Are they getting together? What's the collaboration like there?
Well, let me answer that on two levels, because I think really there's a school level and there's a wider community level. So one of the things that we've done in my time here is to develop time for teachers to collaborate and learn. So we start an hour later on a Thursday morning, and that is collaborative professional learning time. And we get our teachers and our teaching assistants and our learning support assistants together, and we learn together. So that's in addition to our normal meeting times, but we actually allow that time for professional development. And it's been a real push of ours to make sure that we are helping our teachers to become the best that they can be. So we've done some strategic things on a school level, but we've also been able to tap into things internationally. And actually, COVID's changed the way that we've worked. And the British Schools of the Middle East, your own organisation, a lot of organisations that have put things online so people can access a range of conferences and professional learning without the cost of flights and hotel and time out of school. It's almost any time, anywhere learning. And there's a level of excitement. We were just talking about it actually in our leadership team meeting. We have a professional learning newsletter that goes out once a week. And there's a section on it where teachers can add in interesting podcasts, reading that they've had, so we can then share that further and wider as well. So there's been a lot of that. And I suppose then the third level of that is connections within country. There's nothing like a crisis to bring people together. And I've been fortunate and really blessed to be able to make connections with my colleagues, both in Riyadh and more widely in the kingdom. And we regularly talk and work together. So I'll give you an example. We haven't been able to engage in any overseas primary sporting competitions and festivals over the last couple of years. And so we got our heads together and said, well, that doesn't seem very fair on the children. Let's run one ourselves. We can run something in Kingdom. So it's kind of brought collegiality and brought us all together. And that's been really great. And at the end of the day, those things mean that the children are the winners. And that's why we're here.
That is so good to hear. I'm actually excited about what's happening in Saudi Arabia. I think I might be peeking over the fence pretty soon to to connect with educators there, because we tend to have them come to us, and they do come to us a lot from Saudi Arabia. They listen to the Teach Middle East podcast, they come to events, they read the magazine. But I think it's time for myself or a member of our team to come and pay you guys a visit in that side of the Middle East. Before we wrap up the podcast, though, I want to know what you're excited about in terms of the future of education in the kingdom, and what are you excited about in your school for the rest of this academic year? Because we like to end the podcast on a really high note. So 2 things: what you're excited about within your own school, your group of schools, and what you're excited about in education within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Wow. Okay. That's 2 very big questions. And I would like to say, if you or your colleagues want to come over, we'd love to welcome you here to Saudi Arabia. And I think one of the great things about lockdown has meant that we've got to fall in love with Saudi Arabia. And a lot of our families, our children, our staff have traveled around Saudi Arabia in that time and just found what a diverse country it is, from the scuba diving of the Red Sea through to the mountains in the south and the deserts. And it's a country that's got a lot to offer. So I think one of the things that I'm very excited about as a school is, as we found some of these things, then there are trips that we can do in Kingdom. People have gone out, they've traveled, they've made connections, and we suddenly realized we don't have to increase our carbon footprint and fly places and go overseas when we've got so much to offer in Kingdom. And that really excites me. And those connections mean that we can leverage off that for more and more events that children can benefit from in the future. I'm very excited about finishing my first year in my 3rd year and running all of these events for the first time. We've got our school production that's happening, musical next week. We've got lots of events. We have graduations, proms, house activities, all of those things that are getting us to reconnect as a community and get together. We had our International Day. Now, we know that International Day and being in international schools, not just about food, flags and festivals, but those things do help to bring the community together. And I said to our parents, well, we're going to do a little parade of nations. We've got about 60 nations, and we'll do it around our field. If you want to come along and sit on the bleachers, then it would be great to see you. It was outside. I thought that would be a great thing to do. Well, I've never seen so many parents on campus. Like, people have been desperate to do this for a couple of years, and all our parents turned up, and it was absolutely wonderful and a real coming together of the community. So it's very much more of that, and ensuring that our children really just settle back into learning. And I think we've just got to continue on the trajectory that we're on. You've probably noticed by talking to me that I am the world's biggest optimist, and I'm definitely a glass half full kind of person. And to see the opportunities in a situation, and I am very, very optimistic that our children through this period will have developed a level of resilience, which is really going to stand them in good stead in the future. And one of the things that we've probably all noticed in our schools is that at the moment, when this all started, there was real waves of up and down of people being, new notice, and people being quite anxious and trying to make sense of it. And actually now you find that there'll be a big announcement, and actually people are pretty calm about it, and they really are developing those skills. Teachers, parents, children as well. So I think the future's bright, and I'm very optimistic about it.
I'm with you on that. I am a glass half full kind of girl as well, and I like to look at the bright side. So things sound like it's on the up in Saudi and across the region, and I am excited to follow your journey, see where you guys go for the rest of the academic year. All the best with your prom and your get-togethers and all the things that you have planned to connect your community, or should I say reconnect your community. It's been brilliant talking to you, Helen. Thank you so much for your time on the Teach Middle East podcast.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you for listening to the Teach Middle East podcast. Visit our website, teachmiddleeast.com, and follow us on social media. The links are in the show notes.